We are just days away from a bumper episode of Loaded with 2 championship matches this Sunday on YouTube. The ReLoaded podcast is on the air again. Dave Bradshaw here with James R. Kennedy. And James, I want to start off today, if I can, by talking about this ever-changing management dynamic here in Defiant Wrestling. We now have an assistant general manager and an assistant to the assistant general manager. I was just wondering where you fit in on this flowchart. I'm assuming you're like work experience boy or something. Is that right?
Well, actually, Dave Bradshaw, you know, after Loaded was off the air and you and I made our merry way backstage, Adam Foster, the new assistant to an assistant, and Simon Miller, of course, he actually approached me and he had the temerity to ask me to fetch him some tea. I mean, can you believe it? Me, Mr. James R. Kennedy. I'm not a tea boy.
Well, he's above you on the flow chart. I have seen the chart.
What is this flow chart that you keep talking about?
He's third in command, isn't he?
Oh, come on.
You are not number 2 or number 1.
Oh, no. I'll tell you. I wouldn't want to be anywhere close. And if they are the management structure in Defiant Wrestling, General Amin, Simon Miller, and now Adam Foster, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near that. That is... I mean, it's got to be considered some kind of pyramid scheme or something like that. They certainly put the ass in assistant.
Does it bother you that you are lower down on that pyramid, lower down on that food chain than all 3 of them?
No, because I'm not Dave Bradshaw. That is the thing.
You are.
I'm not, though.
These are the facts.
No, listen. Here's a fact for you. You really believe that a man of my pedigree, of my breeding, is below General Amin in the Defiant food chain?
Yes, General Amin's top of the food chain. He's the GM.
Nah, listen, only a matter of time before he gets himself sacked with some of the antics he's been up to. I mean, what is all this hunt for the glasses, hiring assistants who then hire their own assistants? It's ridiculous.
Well, I'll tell you what, one thing he has done very well and very decisively this week, our general manager, is the first thing I want to talk about today, and that is that he has suspended Gabriel Kidd. And quite right, too. If you saw the closing moments of Loaded on Sunday, you will have seen that Gabriel Kidd, for no reason, just because he's Gabriel Kidd and he's just that kind of human being, decided to attack David Starr. Starr obviously still mortified that he failed to become the Defiant champion at Unstoppable. Gabriel Kidd with an absolutely brutal assault. Totally unprovoked.
Well, Gabriel Kidd has obviously become, you know, one of the most frustrated wrestlers on the Defiant roster for a variety of reasons, by the way. And yes, I know what you're going to say. You know, he personally has changed his attitude. Fair enough. I would agree with that, but I actually think, unlike so many people involved in Defiant, that Gabriel Kidd's personality change is a positive. And it should be, you know, it should be well received by management because it shows initiative.
It shows initiative to attack one of your colleagues in the locker room, does it?
Well, you know...
This is why you're where you are on the food chain. You know that.
Rubbish. Listen to what I'm going to say. Earlier on in the night, what was Simon Miller doing with his new assistant Adam Foster? They were going round the locker room and they were asking the wrestlers to pick lollipops out of a bag. And if they got a certain coloured lollipop, they would then be involved in the Magnificent 7 match. What kind of system is that? You know, what kind of world do we live in, Dave Bradshaw, where one wrestler shows initiative, attacks another prime challenger, like Gabriel Kidd did David Starr, and he gets suspended? Meanwhile, we've got everyone running around sucking lollipops. What's going on there?
I think it's a very innovative way to approach the Magnificent 7. Anyway, we'll get to that, but we're talking about Gabriel Kidd right now. And the fact is, Gabriel Kidd, again, explain to me the reason. Explain to me why that is an acceptable thing for any employee to do.
Well, I think that Gabriel Kidd, you know, he had his association with Rory Coyle, another very dangerous individual that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point here. Gabriel Kidd had that association with Coyle. That appears to have come to an end. We'll find out if that's a temporary thing or if, you know, they're going their separate ways for good. I think Gabriel Kidd was trying to plot his next course, if you like, and you know, pen the next chapter in his Defiant career. I believe that, you know, much like everyone else, including David Starr, by the way, Gabriel Kidd wants to be at the top of the food chain. I'm going to use that phrase again. And the only way to do that is to fend off all the other competition. That's all Gabriel Kidd was trying to do. Prove a point to General Amin that no one else matters but the young bull. He's been here since the beginning in Defiant, and yes, he should be the champion. Now,
Sorry, I'm not going to let you keep on spouting all this nonsense. What kind of point does that prove? What kind of point does it prove about how you should be top of this food chain if you're gonna just attack a guy, you're gonna jump attack a guy back in the locker room? If you want to prove you're better than David Starr, beat him in the ring.
Well, here's a question for you, Bradshaw. Were you then upset when Joe Hendry had some interview time ringside with Stevie Aaron, and out of nowhere, here comes David Starr to get in Hendry's face? You know, I see that as very similar.
You know what? How is that similar? How is that similar? That is the exact opposite. Because David Starr came out to the ring. Joe Hendry was talking about competition. David Starr looked him in the eye and said, "You want competition? You've got it. I will face you in the ring." That is what David Starr did. That is the polar opposite to what Kidd then did to Starr later when he attacked him.
Now, here's what I think should have happened. Right there and then, when Gabriel Kidd initiated combat with David Starr, who, by the way, has spent a long time, certainly the past few months, talking about how he craves competition, how he's the best wrestler on the roster, had his issues with Rampage, just yet again became the nearly man in Defiant, couldn't get the job done and become world champion. He was going out of his mind with frustration before Gabriel Kidd hit the scene. I think if General Amin was any kind of leader at all, what he would have done is said to both those men, okay, we're going to have an unsanctioned match here in the backstage area or something to blow off some steam. That's all Gabriel Kidd was doing. He's an angry young man.
Okay, so let me just get this straight. So at the moment after Gabriel Kidd had launched a completely blindside attack on David Starr, and therefore left his ribs in such a condition that Starr couldn't breathe, at that point you would have put Gabriel Kidd in an unsanctioned locker room backstage match with David Starr and Kidd.
Yes.
While one of them could barely even use their lungs properly.
Well, listen, that's the law of the jungle. And Defiant Wrestling sure is a jungle. Listen, one thing I've noticed over the past few months, and I don't know if it's a coincidence, I don't know if it runs in sequence with the fact that this management structure is so unruly, but I have noticed that the roster, there's a lot of unrest in that locker room. People want opportunities. You know, you've got all sorts of characters running around demanding those opportunities, including some that you would say you like. Joe Hendry, David Starr, etc., etc. What is Gabriel Kidd doing that's different? He just wants to prove to the management here in Defiant Wrestling and the fans and the entire watching world that he deserves to be in the conversation for championships.
Oh my God, you are just unbearable. There is no equivalence between the way Gabriel Kidd has conducted himself and the way David Starr has. When Starr wanted an opportunity, he went to Joe Hendry and asked for one. Or before that, when he wanted an opportunity against Rampage, he came out and confronted him man to man, face to face. And then once he'd been able to prove he was worthy of that match by taking Pac to the limit, he got a shot at Rampage at Unstoppable. There is a million miles of difference between how David Starr has got himself those opportunities and by how Gabriel Kidd tried to do it.
I think that Kidd, now at this point in his young career, and yes, he's prone to mistakes, he's still a very young man, but I think at this point in his Defiant Wrestling career, as an original on this roster, Gabriel Kidd is sick and tired of asking. He wants to take opportunities. And you know, back in the day, when I was a bit of a gamer, Bradshaw, I played WCW Backstage Assault, and the way to win championships in that video game was attack everything in sight. Maybe Gabriel Kidd got a copy of that game. That's all I'm saying.
Well, look, it didn't exactly work for him, did it? Because he has been suspended. I've got a couple of updates for you. I can now tell you, or confirm at least for you, that suspension does not have a time limit on it. The word I've got from General Amin is that Kidd is indefinitely suspended. There is no timetable for when he's going to be allowed to return to Defiant, and so this brilliant genius strategy of his to force the issue and put himself at the top has actually ended up with him benching himself possibly permanently.
Well, I disagree with that simply because now this isn't a popular opinion. It really isn't. Even I recognise that. But Gabriel Kidd, he deserves to be rewarded. And hear me out here. I know you're going to scoff at this, but he deserves to be rewarded for showing some initiative. That's all I'm saying here. He is trying to take rather than ask. And surely, in a business as cutthroat as pro wrestling is, that should be acclaimed.
Well, look, I'm not going to go on again and again about your lack of integrity on this, but I will say, just from a purely tactical, purely strategic point of view, morals aside, it hasn't worked for him, has it? Because it hasn't worked. If he thought that was the way that he was going to get himself back into the main event scene, it's ended up with him not on the card at all for the foreseeable future. So it hasn't worked.
No, listen, as much as I disagree with the suspension, perhaps it was inevitable. Because Prince Amin apparently believes that a hunt for some sunglasses and, hiring assistants who then hire their own assistants is more important than taking care and nurturing his prime talent on this roster.
All right, well, the other update I was going to give you while we're on this subject is that, of course, prior to that assault from Gabriel Kidd, as we were alluding to a moment ago, David Starr had come out to the ring and challenged Joe Hendry to a match that, as far as we knew, was going to take place this coming Sunday on Loaded. It won't surprise you to know, if you witness that assault from Gabriel Kidd, that Starr will not be able to compete this Sunday on Loaded. So Starr versus Hendry will have to wait. We will hopefully have more of an update for you on when that match might happen on Loaded this Sunday. So tune in for that. And obviously we apologise that we can't bring you that match this Sunday, but it is the fault of one Gabriel Kidd. Right, while we're on the subject of decisions made by our general manager this week, let's talk a bit more about that Magnificent Seven match, shall we? It wasn't even a decision made by General Amin, of course. It was delegated to the Assistant General Manager, Simon Miller, and the Assistant to the Assistant General Manager, Adam Foster, who between them have come up with a very innovative way to decide who's going to be part of the Magnificent Seven briefcase match this year. Obviously, I can tell by what you've said about it already that you are not a fan of this drawing lots method that they have chosen to utilise for the Magnificent Seven match this year.
I can't believe it. I really cannot believe what I'm seeing. That Simon Miller is being paid to gallivant about the place with a bag full of lollipops and make asinine jokes like, here we go, if you pull a green lollipop out of Adam Foster's sack, reach into his sack and pull something. It's just ridiculous. It's so childish. I cannot believe these guys are in charge around here, and that is why I will never agree with what you say about them being above me or anyone else in the Defiant food chain. I do think this is a ludicrous way to conduct business, but on the other hand, I do see that it is giving some new talent on the Defiant roster some fresh opportunities.
Well, indeed it is, and that is the upside of it. Clearly, is that it is giving, on a very random basis, it is giving a very diverse group of participants the opportunity to get a title shot of their choice, at a title of their choice, at a time and place of their choosing as well. Of course, we have the first two competitors for that Magnificent Seven match on March 16th in Sunderland confirmed. What do you think? What do you make of our two first announcements?
Well, Santos is quite frankly an odd cat, shall we say. Now, I do think he is important to the anti-fun police, don't get me wrong. He obviously has value to Chief Deputy Dunn and Drake, but he's an odd cat. As for Visage, well, we saw Bradshaw that unloaded this past week. Visage is starting to string together some momentum. That's 2 wins on the spin they have heading into the Magnificent Seven, and on a roster as competitive as Defiant has, that's nothing to sniff at.
Yeah, certainly both of those two are in the early part of their careers here in Defiant. Two very different personalities. One who maybe enjoys having fun more than the other. There's a third person, of course, who has been announced for the Magnificent Seven match. It's this year's wild card, following in the footsteps of Christopher Daniels, who was last year's wild card. This year, the wild card is MJF. What do you make of that?
Well, Maxwell Jacob Friedman, all you need to say about this announcement, I will give the general manager, his assistant, and probably his assistant and their assistant, and her auntie, and her dog, and that's how ridiculous this is. But I will give them credit because the announcement that MJF will be in the Magnificent Seven match, that's a game changer. This man is part of the All Elite Wrestling roster for a reason. He sits alongside icons in the industry like Chris Jericho, Christopher Daniels, and more on that roster, and now he's going to bring his own gift of the gab to Defiant Wrestling. And in terms of a wild card man in this Magnificent Seven match, I'm not sure you could have picked a better one than MJF.
I think you and him will get on quite well because you both have this sort of unwarranted air of superiority to yourselves, don't you?
No, Bradshaw, it's not that I think I'm superior to everyone else. It's just that, listen, from birth, and I'm sure, I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I'm sure MJF would understand and sympathise with what I'm saying. Since birth, I have looked at humanity around me and thought, what a bunch of idiots. And, it's not that I think I'm better than them in so many ways, even though I am. That's something else I've spotted. I've often tried to help people and had it thrown back in my face, so I've just stopped caring. I look out for number one.
It's not that I think I'm better than people, although I am.
Well,
there we go. James R. Kennedy quote of the week.
As
I say, well, certainly MJF thinks he's better than you, better than everyone, and we will see if he's better than the other 6 in the Magnificent Seven on March 16th in Sunderland. Of course, that show will be available on Access Defiant at access.wearedefiant.com. As always, if you are a new customer, you can get a 30-day free trial, so effectively you can watch the Magnificent Seven pay-per-view for free if you are part of that free trial. We also have tickets still available for Magnificent Seven at wearedefiant.com/tickets. So make sure you join us there. All right, now, but let's go back in time a little bit. Rather than looking all the way forward ahead to Magnificent Seven, let's look to this Sunday's Loaded and 2 massive championship matches announced for Sunday's show. Let's talk about the Defiant World Championship first of all. Nathan Cruz, the professional, fresh off that victory against Omari at Unstoppable, has challenged our world champion Rampage, and that challenge has been accepted. It is now confirmed. Rampage versus Nathan Cruz for the Defiant World title this Sunday. That is huge.
It really is, and another point to this, another caveat that makes it so interesting. This is experience up against experience. It's alpha male versus professional, yes, but both these men know one another so well. They're both veterans of the UK scene. They've wrestled worldwide for well over a decade now. And, here's a side point, Bradshaw, and it's going to be interesting to see if you agree with this. I don't think you will, because for some reason you have this irrational dislike and distaste for anything I bring to the party. But if Nathan Cruz wins, do you not think it vindicates what he's been saying all along? Because the professionals' argument has long been here in Defiant Wrestling, I should be at the top of the tree, and I should be showing the young lads on the roster how it's done.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt he's earned his shot. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you there. I think it was absolutely crucial to his future in Defiant that he did defeat Omari at Unstoppable, especially after Omari beat him on Loaded. But Cruz did win that match. I might not like Nathan Cruz very much, and I might prefer Omari as a human being, but Cruz won the match, and Cruz won it pretty decisively, ultimately, at Unstoppable. And so, yeah, he deserves the match, and he has proven time and time again in other promotions, by the way, that he can more than hang with Rampage. Those two have been going at it up and down the country for various promotions for years. They're both Yorkshire boys. One is from Hull, one is from Leeds. They both been coming up through the same promotions at the same time, so they know each other inside out. And every time they wrestle, you sort of think it's kind of a coin flip who's going to win it. It's not one of those things where you think, oh, Rampage is the overwhelming favourite here. As much of a hot streak as Rampage has been on, now a year is it that he's been undefeated here in Defiant, and 300 days of that year as champion. Nathan Cruz is someone who knows him better than anyone he's faced in those 300 days. And so you look at someone who has a tremendous opportunity to end that title reign, and you're looking at Nathan Cruz.
And here's the thing as well. So many people, after Rampage defeated David Starr at Unstoppable, so many people wondered what was next for the champion. because he has been a workhorse here in this company. He really has. He's blasted through every single obstacle, every single challenge that has been put in his way. But the thing about these lengthy title reigns is it takes so long to build them and only 3 seconds to tear them down. And that's something Nathan Cruz will have in the back of his mind. You know, I happen to know that Rampage and Nathan Cruz, they've clashed heads before. You know, they've wrestled before, but never over a championship as prestigious as a Defiant World Heavyweight Championship. But Nathan Cruz will come into this match knowing Rampage inside and out, and knowing that it only takes 3 little seconds. And then all this talk of 300 days for Rampage, which is impressive. No one can deny that. Not me, not you, not anyone. Rampage has dominated that championship. He really has. But Nathan Cruz has the experience that some of Rampage's prior opponents, they can't claim to have. He also has this mean streak. I mean, you saw what he did to a man like Darius. This man will stop at nothing. He is a professional because he likes to work clean. But sometimes when the situation calls for it, Nathan Cruz will get dirty as well. And I think against Rampage, the situation certainly calls for it.
But, you know, it's interesting what you say there, that Rampage has been dominant for 300 plus days. That is true. But that dominance doesn't come without a cost, right? We know that Rampage suffered a mild concussion against David Starr at Unstoppable. We know that Rampage has been wearing that athletic tape on his right shoulder for months now, right? There is still something not quite right with his shoulder. So that wear and tear does build up over time. And Nathan Cruz he's the kind of guy, he does his homework, Nathan Cruz. He knows Rampage as a competitor anyway, but he will also be 100% aware of the recent injury problems that Rampage has had. And so I think this is a real moment of threat for Rampage and for his title reign on Sunday. Let's talk about the other title match that's happening on Loaded as well. This is an issue that we debated in some depth last week, but I want to talk about it again given that there's been some developments here. Kanji, the women's champion, is going to go one-on-one with the former champion, Bea Priestley. Now, this is something I said she needed to do. I said that Kanji, if she wants to answer her critics, she needs to get that signature win against the former champion. Something she hasn't really done. She hasn't done that one-on-one, of course, because Kanji won that championship in a gauntlet match. Now, I don't think Kanji can do it. I've been pretty clear about that, and that's no disrespect to her, but Bea Priestley is a fierce opponent, a much more experienced opponent. I admire Kanji for taking the initiative and saying that she wants to prove her doubters wrong by taking on Priestley this Sunday. That is exactly the sort of thing I said she needed to do last week, so good for her for doing it. Lots of people have been saying that was what she needed to do. It's a bold step, but I still think, I'll stand by what I said last week, I think it's a fatal step for her future as Defiant Women's Champion.
You know, the human side of me, and I do have one, despite what some people may think, the human side of me feels sorry almost for Kanji, because she came out of nowhere, Dave Bradshaw, and became the Defiant Women's Champion. And that's no mean feat. That's not easily done, considering, you know, the fierce competition she faces in that division. And Bea Priestley is living proof of that. You know, Bea Priestley was someone who, way back in Defiant, you know, she had a bit of attitude about her. She had a bit of swagger. She still has that deep down, and it comes out at certain points. But since she has traversed the globe and, you know, went to Japan and taken on some of this worldly experience that she otherwise didn't have, she's become an even more dangerous woman. Because now, on her side, she has the skills to back up the mouth, if that makes sense. And I think that could spell disaster for Kanji, because Kanji wants so badly to prove her stock as the Defiant Women's Champ. She could do that by defeating a former 2-time champion. You know, Bea Priestley, of course, decimated stunning Lana Austin in that Falls Count Anywhere match at Unstoppable. That punt to the skull was vicious, and it would be a fine way for Kanji to make a mark by defeating Bea Priestley. But she has to be careful, because this entire situation could blow up in her face. You know, Priestley only wants to continue her quest to reassert dominance over the women's division here in Defiant. Kanji would love to match that, but all this pressure from social media, from fans in attendance at ringside, quite frankly. Also management as well. There are so many cannons firing at Kanji right now. I'm not sure she knows which way to turn, but she can only focus on Bea Priestley, because if she beats Bea Priestley, all this goes away.
Look, let me ask you this, right? You saw that interview with Kanji where she insisted on facing Priestley this week. Now, you could take that in two ways. You could take that as someone who does have self-confidence and wants to prove herself, and you could take it at face value. I kind of took that, what we saw from Kanji this week on Loaded, as someone whose own self-doubt is growing. It's growing by the day, by the week. It's as someone who is starting to listen to those critics online and almost in a move of desperation wants to prove them wrong by possibly biting off more than she can chew and taking on Bea Priestley. So I think Kanji's chances here on Sunday depend largely on where she is psychologically as well. I still think even if she's in the best place psychologically, she's still an underdog. But if she is coming into this match with self-doubt, thinking, I really don't think I can beat Bea Priestley, but there's one way to find out, so let's settle this, then she has no hope. There is zero chance of her beating Bea Priestley if that is the attitude she's coming in with. If she's coming in, deluded or not, thinking, I can beat Bea Priestley, then, stranger things have happened. But I think it's a self-doubting champion, and that is a recipe for disaster if that's true.
I think Kanji is akin to an animal backed into a corner right now. I think she felt she had to lash out. She had to show, listen, all this pressure coming from all corners. I have to fight this somehow, and the only way I know how is to challenge and fight inside that ring. And don't forget, she is the champion going into this match. But it's a unique championship match. What do I always say, Bradshaw, during these title matches? The champion has the advantage because the challenger has to beat them. Well, this is such a different scenario because Kanji almost feels like this is must win. And I mean definitively by pinfall or submission.
All right, well, we'll find out. So Rampage versus Cruz, Kanji versus Bea Priestley, both of those matches happening on Loaded this coming Sunday. Before we go today, I want to talk about this past Sunday's main event on Loaded. We haven't addressed that yet, and it is another situation that is mired in controversy. It was a match we were really looking forward to, wasn't it? A non-title tag team match between Aussie Open, the tag team champions, against the debuting Team White Wolf from Spain. Aussie Open won the match ultimately, but there was a huge amount of confusion around that pinfall about whether it was a 2 count or a 3 count. Referee eventually called for the bell. I'm not sure it was a 3 count. I'm still not sure. I wasn't on commentary. I'm not now. I think when A-Kid and Carlos Romo, Team White Wolf, say that they were livid, understandably, at the end of that match, and they were saying they felt like they'd been robbed of their chance to beat the tag team champions. I think they have a point.
Generally, I don't trust referees. As a former manager, that was an unwritten rule of mine, personally. But I'm going to make an exception here because the action that we witnessed in that main event of Loaded, Aussie Open and Team White Wolf, who I was impressed by, that's the first time I've watched them live and in living colour. A-Kid and Carlos Romo, they were awesome. But there were so many moving parts in that match that I have to feel for the referee. Now, I know that it was a contentious call. You could tell by the response, as you say, of A-Kid and Romo. They were livid, they were furious, and perhaps rightly so, but you have to feel for the referee slightly, and I don't say that often, simply because Aussie Open's matches, they're so ferocious. And a quick note on Aussie Open as well. We talk about Rampage being a world heavyweight champion for around 300 days. Well, Aussie Open are matching him day for day because they won those Defiant tag champs on the same night at No Regrets last year. That's insane. And although this was a non-title match, I think it shows you something about Mark Davis and Kyle Fletcher that they still worked overtime to get the win. And they can't be blamed for a poor refereeing call.
No, well, first of all, I don't think the referee made the decision. I don't think it was anything malicious. I just think the referee got caught up in what was a very high tempo, frenetic tag team match, and I think we just made the wrong call, and it can happen to anyone. So it's not. I'm not meaning it as a particular criticism of the referee, but you can understand from the perspective of Team White Wolf that they do feel that they deserve another shot. And it was a great match. There's no doubt about it. It was a hell of a tag team match. Great main event on Loaded. You know, I was talking to A-Kid afterwards, actually, and it's interesting their background, you know, A-Kid and Romo. They come from White Wolf Wrestling in Spain, which is a promotion that they essentially helped to start up themselves several years ago because there just wasn't enough opportunity to perform in Spain. You know, they were basically self-taught. They were teaching themselves how to wrestle, and they wanted a chance to perform in front of a crowd. So they've helped to create their own promotion where they've been able to gain experience. And through that promotion, they've had, well, A-Kid, for example, has had matches against the likes of Ricochet and Zack Sabre Jr. that's brought him into the spotlight in the past couple of years, and that is how they've been able to gain that platform. It's an entirely self-made platform that they've built for themselves. That is the depth of their passion for what they do, and it showed. I think it really showed just how much they are dedicated to their craft. I think it was a remarkable debut performance in many ways, and I hope we see them again.
And look at what happened. There's that word again, initiative. Team White Wolf showed initiative by getting involved in a start-up company, and now they're in Defiant Wrestling. How's that different to what Gabriel Kidd is trying to do?
Oh, please, we're not going back to that.
Okay, but it's true, Bradshaw. You can run away from it all you like. I'm just spitting some truth.
Yeah, I'm sure you are. Yeah. I don't feel the need to go back to that. I mean, I think the listeners can just decide for themselves whether you have any merit in what you're saying or whether you're just full of it. But I think we all know the answer. Lastly, speaking of people who are full of it, SCC came out at the end of that match. After that controversial decision, they came out to confront Aussie Open, the tag team champions, and then sort of immediately changed their mind and disappeared again. Any idea what that was about?
Well, I think this was Ashley Dunn and Kelly Six, the SCC. This was their way of letting Aussie Open know. You know, you might think after what happened in that main event on Loaded that you already have unfinished business with the debutantes Team White Wolf, but don't forget about us. And, you know, why shouldn't Six and Dunn believe that they're in the hunt for the tag team titles? They've started racking up victories here in Defiant Wrestling. They've started coming into their own. They're clearly listening to advice from their mentor, Will Ospreay. They're doing him proud. And now next week, the SCC go up against Jody Fleisch, Johnny Storm, two legends of the UK wrestling scene. And I think for a couple of fledgling legends, like the South Coast Connection are, that if they win that match, think of it as a proving ground. If the SCC beat Fleisch and Storm, they have to be in the frame for a shot at Aussie Open.
Do you know how disrespectful that is, what you just said? To call them fledgling legends, to try and even put Kelly Six and Ashley Dunn in the same bracket as Jody Fleisch and Johnny Storm. Do you know how disrespectful that is to the legacies of those two men, Storm and Fleisch?
I'm just looking into my crystal ball. I really am. I don't think you can hold back natural talent. And yes, Fleisch and Storm have been amazing for British professional wrestling for going on 15 to 20 years. But the future is now, Bradshaw. And the South Coast Connection, much like other disgruntled young stars in Defiant Wrestling that you don't want me to talk about apparently, the SCC are sick and tired of waiting for their turn. They want it now. They crave it. They know what they can do between those ropes, and they can't wait to do it.
Well, look, for those people who don't, if you're new to British wrestling and maybe you're not familiar with Jody Fleisch and Johnny Storm, both of them were absolute pioneers, absolute trailblazers, particularly in the early and mid-2000s when British wrestling wasn't exactly at a high point in its history. You know, it was still reeling a decade or so later from World of Sport being cancelled on ITV, and they were a major part of this new generation that brought this more athletic, acrobatic style of wrestling to UK shores. And in many ways, the likes of Will Ospreay, the likes of Pac, all of those guys wouldn't be here and wouldn't have the platform to perform in British wrestling that they do if there hadn't been people like Johnny Storm and Jody Fleisch first. So if SCC want to talk about Will Ospreay as their buddy and their mentor, then, well, maybe they should have a little bit more respect for Johnny Storm and Jody Fleisch, because I promise you, those two are integral in the development of someone like Ospreay as well.
Well, don't get me wrong. For anyone out there you know, who hasn't been fortunate enough to watch Jody Fleisch or Johnny Storm do their thing inside that ring. You know, you're looking at two guys who are getting a bit older, but they haven't lost a step. And that actually surprised me. The last time I watched these two guys wrestle, I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought, surely age will be a factor, but no. And that's why I think this is a proving ground for the SCC, because if Dunn and Six can overcome Fleisch and Storm, then Aussie Open and a crack at those Defiant tag titles are surely in their future. Now is the time. Now is the time, Dave.
All right, well, SCC and Fleisch and Storm this Sunday on Loaded, the latest chapter in the GATI, the General Amin Tag Team Invitational, that open challenge that has been facing SCC over the past few weeks, and where they have so far, unfortunately, been flawless. But I'm pretty confident that that will change against Storm and Fleisch this Sunday. There is one more piece of business I want to address with you today.
Oh?
Yeah, well, if you remember last week, I promised I would present some more evidence in this ongoing scandal about how you've apparently rigged. I don't know how. I mean, it takes a lot of effort to do this for something that ultimately, you know, isn't the biggest thing in the world, but you've rigged the Commentator of the Year
not this again.
2018 award. We already know that there was a number of questionable votes that happened in the final few hours of that online vote at the end of the year, all coming from an IP address in Moscow. We managed to trace that to a hotel in Moscow, and interestingly, now, the week before that happened, I now have clear evidence that you stayed at that hotel.
Who is your source? Humour me. Who is your source?
I'm telling you who my source is, obviously, but the fact is that you were in Moscow. I also happen to know who you met with, and that that person is a well-known social media operative of the Russian government, which just, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing that you've involved the Russian military elite in trying to rig an online vote for Defiant's Commentator of the Year. That is the extent of your ego, and I now know you did it.
I'm sick of this.
So I'm presenting the evidence to General Amin.
I'm honestly sick of it. This has dragged on way too long. It really has. I think, you know, I didn't want to do it because, you know, you consider me a friend, and a broadcast colleague, and in many ways an intellectual superior. Your words, not mine. I've heard you say it after a few beers. I think it's time that I have to issue an ultimatum, Bradshaw. Because, you know, you keep making all these wild conspiracy claims without any actual evidence. Now, by the time we do this podcast next week, you know, by the time we talk about everything else that's happening in Defiant Wrestling, and there's so much to get through without your conspiracy theories bogging it down, if after all that, if you cannot bring some circumstantial evidence that proves to me that what you're saying is true, and not only me, the entire world that's listening to this, that I rigged the Defiant Wrestling Commentator of the Year Awards for 2018, then I think you have to eat humble pie, my friend. Because if you have no evidence, there is no case.
All right, well, first of all, you're not my friend. But secondly, you want that? Okay, fine. You know what? Yeah, you're right. This dragged on a long time. So next week, I will bring absolutely irrefutable proof, and when I do, you will concede that you fixed the Commentator of the Year award.
Okay.
Deal?
Okay, listen.
We'll settle this next week. One way or another, we'll settle this.
If you can bring evidence that frames me somehow, even though it's ludicrous, and I don't know where you're getting all these sources that tell you I was in Moscow. Listen, if I was in Moscow, it was a complete coincidence. I'm a very busy man, an international jet setter. I get all over the place. And if you can bring me evidence that suggests that I rigged this poll and I suddenly somehow paid people to vote or whatever it is you have in mind, if you can bring me that evidence, I promise you. How about this? I promise you. We can even film it if you like. I will get down on my knees and I will hand you an award that tells you that you are the Defiant Wrestling Commentator of the Year. And I'm laughing as I say that because there is no chance in hell it will ever happen.
All right. Well, next week we'll see, won't we? There we are. All right. That is it. That's all we have time for. We will, of course, see you this coming Sunday on Loaded for those 2 championship matches as well as SCC against Fleisch and Storm. That's all coming up on Sunday. You can join the conversation on anything you've been listening to on today's podcast using the hashtag #WeAreDefiant. You can tweet us at DefiantRes. That's Defiant WRES. You can tweet me at Dave Bradshaw. What's your Twitter again?
You can follow me on Twitter at TopClassKennedy. And also, if you're feeling a little frisky and you want to see how the other half live, you can also follow my new girlfriend. This week's girlfriend is none other than the sumptuous, gorgeous, wonderful Natalie Portman. And you can get her on Twitter at natp.com. I don't know what happened to Margot Robbie. I mean, she just stopped answering my calls. She must be too busy filming or something. That's the only explanation I can come up with.
You know what? Natalie Portman is your girlfriend in the same universe where Gabriel Kidd didn't deserve to be suspended.
Exactly. It's called The Real World.
Yeah, well, you can call it what you like. All right, that's going to do it. Thank you for listening this week to the ReLoaded podcast. As I say, we will see you on Sunday. Kanji versus B. Priestley for the women's title. Rampage versus Nathan Cruz for the Defiant World title. It is all happening this Sunday on Loaded.